Okay, thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. A warm greeting from Hyderabad, down south in Telangana, to all of you. Uh, at the outset, I should thank Dr. Ram Mohan, the head of the Department of Anthropology, Sikkim University, to consider me worthy enough to be invited to speak among such distinguished and highly achieved academicians. I'm glad I'm able to do this in the cyberspace, and thanks once again for this wonderful opportunity. The theme for this year's International Day of World's Indigenous People is COVID-19 and Indigenous Peoples' Resilience. And the topic I have been given is the role of communication in improving the resilience of Indigenous people in the light of COVID-19. I will try to blend my experience from two domains. One, I am academically an anthropologist, but I'm not in mainstream academics, but I have been training the aspirants for civil services. I have been doing some visual ethnography. I'm a filmmaker and have been working as a consultant in the domain of development and strategic communications and associated with organizations like Administrative Staff College of India. So I will try to blend my experience from these two domains, which is for almost 25 years now, and try to put the two domains together and discuss with you about the communication and the role of communication in improving the tribal resilience, in the context of COVID-19 and also prevention. As Dr. Ram Mohan was mentioning, the definition of indigenous people is still very elusive for us in India, because it is a Western construct, which is probably more amenable to countries like Australia and New Zealand, Canada, and to some extent North America, United States, and Latin America. But when it comes to India, technically all of us are indigenous. But as Dr. Ram Mohan said, let us restrict the scope of the term indigenous people to what the Constitution of India says, our guiding document, and talk in the context of resilience and prevention of COVID-19 in the scheduled tribe populations of the countries. That's one of the reasons, since they are the original inhabitants of India, we call them Adivasis. In Sanskrit, Adi is someone who is living from the beginning, the primary, and Vasi is a resident. And in English, it translates to aborigines. But that is the term indigenous. Coming to the term resilience. This year's theme, as I said, of the United Nations is resilience of the indigenous people. But the term resilience, again, is multidimensional and it is polysemic. It is a term with multiple meanings. Well, we open any of the literature available to us, it essentially implies the ability to bounce back after any traumatic or any painful experience. Resilience is a capacity to maintain a healthy condition following an exposure to any kind of an adversity. It is successful adaptation. It is a capacity to rebound. And when it comes to the human context, putting it from an anthropological context, we can understand the term resilience to imply the elasticity of the human spirit, the human society, and the human cultures. For millions of years, the human people, the human populations, and the human species had withstood more than one pandemic, more than one epidemic, natural calamities, human calamities. Despite the fact that we have faced so many challenges, one of the reasons why we are the most successful species on the surface of this planet is essentially because of our inherent capacity that we already have, which is resilience. Resilience is not a new concept that the human species and the human cultures have to be taught. But given the fact that we are living in a globalized era and the indigenous people across the world are exposed very dangerously to the so-called civilizational complexes, the so-called mainstream developmental societies. It is necessary that we need to protect them against any kind of a pandemic, an epidemic, or any kind of an onslaught. So resilience is a concept that has multiple dimensions. It has an economic dimension. One of the speakers today is going to speak about livelihoods and economic resilience of the Aboriginal people. There are social dimensions because COVID-19, as we are going to see, is redefining the way we live and probably the way we are going to live for a long time to come. And there is also a psychological dimension to resilience because there is a lot of emotional onslaught, anxiety, fear that COVID-19 is unleashing on the human minds. And no amount of scientific development and technology and medicine is able to alleviate us from that kind of an anxiety. Dimension to resilience, and of course, the biological dimension when we talk about our immune systems, our capacity to come back to normal, and maintaining an homeostasis with our environment. So the medical, economic, social, and psychological dimensions is what resilience is. But the problem is, the word resilience is something that is often used in a kind of a scenario which is post facto. It is a concept that kicks in after the adversity sets in. Now the question is, the big question is, are we assuming that the tribal populations survived this pandemic? Are we assuming that the indigenous people, I'm more concerned about the people in India, will they be able to bounce back should this pandemic make inroads into their societies and communities? Indigenous people have had a very long history of pandemics devastating them. I'm sure all you students of anthropology know that the European colonization of Americas has brought in smallpox and influenza, measles, to the Amazon basin also. Homegrown epidemics like malaria in India, gastroenteritis, cholera, typhoid, sexually transmitted diseases are killing hundreds of tribal people every year. These are the things that normally are preventable. Most of them, for you and me, living in a so-called civilized society, requires outpatient treatment and over-the-counter medication. Mortality was never a kind of a threat when it comes to things like malaria or even cholera. Now imagine the plight of the indigenous people, the tribal people, in the context of COVID-19. They are very vulnerable. But when you look at the definition of Government of India or the bulletins of Government of India and kind of people that Government of India has identified, including WHO, who are vulnerable? The children, young children whose immune systems are not yet fully stabilized, old people above 50 or 60 years, and people with comorbidities like cardiovascular diseases, people with hypertension, cancer survivors, people with kidney ailments and on dialysis. But nowhere in the list of the vulnerable sections of the population for COVID-19 do you see a special mention of the scheduled tribes, who are very immune compromised as compared to the rest of the mainstream populations in India. They are immune compromised because a majority of indigenous people across the world are living in voluntary isolation, not from today, but from times immemorial. The tribal people are most vulnerable. Let us see some of the reasons why they are most vulnerable. They have significantly higher instances of communicable and also today non-communicable diseases. The epidemiological transition has happened where even in the tribal populations, you see non-communicable diseases and lifestyle disorders setting in. So hypertension is not something that is unknown in tribal morbidity list. Malnutrition and undernourishment. They have shorter life expectancies, poor sanitation facilities. They do not live in hygienic households. They have inadequate medical infrastructure, lack of proper transport and communication, lack of literacy, poverty, improper personal hygiene, public coughing, an obsession towards social gatherings, and comorbid conditions, most importantly, pulmonary tuberculosis and compromised immune systems are very common across the indigenous people in India. Unfortunately, adding insult to the injury is the absence of any social service mechanism or social support systems. And most of the development programs in tribal areas, I don't have to tell you, you are in the mainstream development anthropology, that you know they are underfinanced, and scheduled tribe development programs are underfunded. United Nations has said that socio-economic marginalization with disproportionate risk public health emergencies is the single most important challenge the indigenous people will face in the context of COVID-19. It is a public health emergency. It is not going to differentiate between the rich and the poor, whether you are indigenous or not, whether you are rural or tribal, whether you are upper caste or lower caste, whether you are Indian or not. It does not. This is the ruthless virus that has actually brought in probably what is called as a leveling mechanism, that it has flattened the egos of all the humans on earth. It's not differentiating anybody. It's attacking everyone. Even our ministers and union ministers are getting affected, and the most rich and famous are also getting affected. But it's not the question of who is getting affected. It's the question of who is going to bounce back from it. Who has the capacity to fight back the coronavirus? Who has the resilience to withstand the onslaught of this particular pandemic? You know, the tribal people, unfortunately, have the right combination of all the necessary ingredients that can make COVID play a havoc with their lives. COVID, you know, has a beautiful ecosystem to unleash its dirty after effects on the indigenous people across the world, and especially in India. The question is, when we are not able to tackle the chronic medical conditions of the indigenous people for these many centuries, and post-independence, the morbidity rates are still concerning. You know, and when we are not able to bring in a social change in the tribal lives, which is palpable, can we, you know, on an accelerated scale, bring about rapid social change now because of the COVID pandemic? Do the indigenous people have the capacities, intellectual or otherwise, to rapidly re-engineer their social structures, their customs and institutions in order to adapt to the COVID-19? I am not very sure that they have the patience and the wherewithal. The focus should be instead on prevention. The focus should be instead on making sure that Corona does not make inroads into the tribal hinterlands and the tribal geographies. The voluntary isolation that I was telling you about, you know, unfortunately does not exist anymore because of the challenges, poverty, and of the search of alternative livelihoods. Indigenous people are today integrated with modern markets, and they are having a lot of non-tribal interactions, either because of economic or because of governance related issues. Many have migrated to the cities, and there is a massive return migration that has happened because of the lockdowns that India has imposed. But in certain states like Andhra Pradesh, the return migration did not impact the rural areas for a long time because of the quarantine protocols, and where even villages started taking proactive steps in preventing the outsiders from entering. But come unlock 2 and unlock 3, you will see that the number of COVID cases in the cities is plateauing and the COVID cases in rural areas is increasing. And that is our single biggest concern as anthropologists, is because we are dealing now with the indigenous people. Unfortunately, there is not enough data coming from the governments or the data coming from the NGOs regarding ethnicity and the positivity rate of COVID-19. There is no specific tribal specific data coming. You know, they are only giving us a total number of people affected, but it is not further, clarified. It is not further drilled down into a data point which we can use in order to understand the specific impact that this virus is having on a specific indigenous group in the country. That data is grossly missing, which is extremely critical. Now, coming back, I am sorry for that long backgrounder, but what is the role of communication? Communication has been a biggest barrier, and I don't have to tell the distinguished crowd in this meeting today about the importance of communication when it comes to, engaging with the indigenous people. Communication has been the biggest barrier so far in mainstreaming the scheduled tribes historically. That's mainly because there is a lot of suspicion, lack of confidence in the mainstream institutions and development models because of improper advocacy and participation from them owing to barriers in communication. The fight against COVID today is being fought in the world only through communication, media, and IEC initiatives. Never in the recent history of the human species, the importance of communication is felt as much as it is being felt today. The reason is because there is no treatment, there are no medicines, and there is no preventive protocol, there are no vaccines. All the interventions to prevent COVID-19 are purely non-pharmacological interventions. They don't involve any pharmacopoeia, they don't involve any kind of medicine. The non-pharmacological interventions require behavior change. They say maintain social distancing. I have a problem with that word. You cannot socially distance from somebody. You can only probably physically distance yourself temporarily. And no person better than an indigenous culture can understand the concept of social distancing better. It's physical distancing. So, non-pharmacological interventions like wearing of the mask, hand hygiene, and social or physical distancing requires behavior change. And behavior change requires IEC initiatives, information, education, and communication initiatives. So currently, we have only one vaccine to prevent COVID-19, and that vaccine is a non-medical vaccine called communication. If you are able to communicate better, and the receiver of the message is able to understand our message better, that's the best preventive right now we have to fight against this scourge called corona. There are certain key messages that are required to reach the people in very simple and understandable way. I told you, we all know some of them: personal hygiene, hand hygiene, wearing of the masks, physical distancing. But there are certain other equally critical messages that have to reach the indigenous people, like boosting one's immune system, the comorbidities under check. I mean, today I think every second person has hypertension. India is today called the diabetes capital of the world. Epidemiological transition I was mentioning into the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases in the tribal areas, has already happened. Another key message is, we need to monitor our symptoms regularly. We need to keep a tab on our personal health regularly. And we need to also develop some kind of a wherewithal, some kind of a knowledge in differentiating between influenza-like symptoms, which are ILS, and COVID symptoms. A majority of educated, urban, literate, upper and middle class populations are not able to understand these critical aspects of fighting COVID. One of the reasons why today it has reached the proportions that it has touched more than 2 million population yesterday. The reason this is happening is because the so-called urban class is not able to understand the critical aspects of this disease. The biggest challenge in front of us is to carry this message in an understandable way, using creative and innovative communication channels, and make the indigenous people understand, the strategic reasons why they should. Communication also plays a very critical role in elevating anxiety and the fear of death. You saw the reverse migration, the exodus of people when the lockdown happened. Just imagine what fear can do to people. Pregnant ladies walking 200 kilometers. The laborers, since there is no transport and communication, walked thousands of kilometers. From Hyderabad, they went all the way to Rajasthan and Bihar. Look at what fear and anxiety will do to people. Some of the laborers, we asked, why are you walking? Why don't you wait for the government? They said, I don't want to die here. I want to die in the lap of my village, in the lap of my culture and my people. So fear and anxiety and the fear of death is something that has to be elevated. And just like a psychological counselor sits with every one of us for hours together and communicates with us to and fro, is the only solution here. And that is something that has to be done in the context of even indigenous people. We need to use communication to enhance their confidence levels on our health and medical facilities. My field work was in the context of ethnomedicine and medical anthropology. And during the course of my field work in the Paderu district of Vizag, one of the most important reasons why the morbidity and mortality levels were very high amongst the tribal populations is because they lack confidence in urban healthcare. Indigenous people live in a context of medical pluralism, isn't it? They have access to multiple systems of healthcare, and ethnomedical practices, their own indigenous health practices, is something that they have a lot of confidence on. There are many issues that dog the delivery of primary health care to indigenous people. Unfortunately, for these many decades and centuries, we haven't built that confidence amongst the indigenous people on the modern health delivery practices. It's improved a lot, significantly. I agree, but it has to be substantial. Communication is required to break those kind of wide gulfs we have the eternal fear of government, the eternal fear of development programs, the eternal fear of modern institutions that is there amongst the indigenous people has to be taken out of their mindsets. And communication has a very critical role to play. We need to build gain their trust on the mainstream institutions. So this is what the communication has to do in the generic context and also in the specific context of COVID-19. But is it easy? Is it seamless? Unfortunately, the answer is a big no. It's not seamless. There are many roadblocks to communicating effectively and efficiently. There are many. I have only identified few for the purpose of today's topic. Number one, lack of communication channels. A message is made, assume. But what is the medium that we choose? What kind of media has to be leveraged to make the message reach those people? I was trying to seriously dig into seeing the penetration of mobile phones. And with great difficulty at 1 a.m. this morning, I found an article which said that 85% of the non-tribal population have mobile phones, whereas less than 20% of of the tribal populations have a mobile phone. But any mobile phone. So communication today is piggybacking on the mobile technology. In what way can we communicate with the indigenous people who are isolated from the material culture also? That is one major challenge we have, is to identify a communication channel. Mobile technology hasn't penetrated, and as a consequence, social media hasn't penetrated the indigenous people to the same extent as it has done in the case of the mainstream population. And you know the role of social media. In fact, it is what social media has become our single important source of information about research, about the statistics that are happening. In fact, the government is leveraging on the social media technologies to reach out to the people than conventional media. In spite of the fact that social media has all its drawbacks, because the news is not filtered there. An absence of informed and committed leadership, except in the 6 scheduled areas, in the rest of the country, committed leadership is something that is wanting. A leadership that has not migrated to the nearby centers or cities, a leadership that is integral and it is part and parcel of the people, breathing the same air as the indigenous people, is what is required in this context. Can we use NGOs? Yes, we can. We have been using them. And KIs, the knowledge institutions like your universities. But today, they are also suffering from the dearth of human resources, lack of transport and communication, the quarantine protocols in the state borders, restriction on interstate travels, and even the NGOs, are not able to find the right number of people who can be transported to these areas and work at the grassroots level. That will be a problem that will probably multiply as we go forward, as more and more people are falling, I don't say falling prey, as more and more people are getting infected. There would be at least 1 month of complete isolation that one is expected to follow. Then who else is there? When there is no committed leadership, there is no media or there is no channel available, when the NGOs are suffering from a dearth of committed volunteers, and knowledge institutions like universities are shut down across the country, in this given scenario of a lockdown, who do we choose then? Then we have to depend on the government, and government officials, and we have to depend on the healthcare workers. But healthcare workers, you see, will not have the patience. They do not have the wherewithal, and they do not have the resources to go and engage with each and every single tribal family and explain the pros and cons and the nuances of, the messaging that is required is something that the healthcare workers cannot do. They are overworked, they are overburdened, and it is unfair on our part to expect the healthcare workers to do everything for us, because it is them who are keeping us alive today, and they are essentially, Vaidyo Narayano Hari, as they say in Sanskrit. They are the ones who are the gods themselves. And we can't overburden them with the responsibilities of carrying the key messaging to the indigenous people. And then another major barrier in communication is the linguistic barrier. Communication is extremely centralized across the world. They are all generated probably at CDC or WHO levels, and in our case, the MOHFW. And then the same messaging, because we have to maintain a consistency in the messaging, it percolates down. But you see, the most important messaging is only done in the regional languages. Linguistic barrier has been a biggest barrier in the context of tribal literacy, and it is the biggest barrier today in trying to take the key important messaging to the indigenous people also. So quality and the type of messaging will get affected because of linguistic barriers. So we need to come out with a completely decentralized approach to communication, and it can only happen if we now follow a bottom-top approach rather than top-to-bottom approach. So very quickly, I think I have overshot my time, my apologies. Very quickly, what is the role of anthropology? Well, number one, we have an emic approach. I'm so happy, Dr. Ram Mohan, that I see Mr. Norzang Lepcha amongst us. There are many other online meetings happening today, but I rarely, I don't remember having seen an indigenous voice, that is representing today. And this is what the world requires. We need to listen to them. It's not they should listen to us. And anthropologists are the ones who have that emic approach towards development. And I'm leaving it to you, you know what it means. We focus on holism. The social, cultural, economic, environmental, and psychological dimensions, which are the part and parcel of the tribal cosmology and tribal ecosystem, is something only we understand. And I think this knowledge has to be leveraged in coming out, breaking the communication barriers that exist in the context of COVID-19, and also to build infrastructure to improve their resilience. Citizen engagement, community mobilization, participation, and sustainability of the programs is something that we have been focusing on right from the time of the British rule, since Asiatic Society of Bengal or William Jones, and subsequently with the social legislations. It's time that anthropologists should help the government in building relationships, help the government understand that they should develop a deference, a respect towards the tribal leadership, and they should listen to the traditional authority systems. And most importantly, we should integrate the tribal infrastructure and indigenous knowledge to fight COVID in rest of India. We don't have to teach indigenous people resilience. I'm sure they have much more resilience than us. Look at what has happened to Sentinelese and the other Andamanese tribes when tsunami struck. When the rest of the world was investing millions of dollars in a tsunami warning system, the tsunami left the Andamanese untouched. That means they had a premonition. They have an indigenous knowledge system that raised their antennae, and they withstood the onslaught of the tsunami. And that is the capacity and capability of tribal indigenous knowledge. So we need to make use of their knowledge also. Communication is two-way. It takes two to tango. And it is not just we communicating with them, but they should also be heard. And tribal leadership, tribal traditional authority systems, and tribal political leadership should be partnered with. That is the only way today, in the absence of any other communication channel, that's the only way today that we can build economic immune system, their psychological immune system, and of course, their biological immune system. We need to look at their immune boosting in all the institutions. For all you know, they are immune. I think if we can engage with them, they already have a treatment for COVID. They already have a vaccine against COVID. What is required is listen to them. I started by saying that resilience is bouncing back. The indigenous people will bounce back. But all they require is a wall. And we, the people of India, should be that wall that will help them prevent the COVID and Corona from making inroads into their domains. Because once it enters the tribal areas, it will create havoc. So communication is the be-all and end-all of the game to build everything when it comes to tribal resilience. Thank you so much. Honored. My apologies for overshooting my time, but an emotional area, so I was taken away. Thanks so much, Dr. Ramon and everybody else for listening to me.